Hi everyone, welcome to the Digital Supply Chain Podcast. My name is Tom Raftery, and with me on the show today, I have my special guest, Chris. Chris, welcome to the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Tom. My name is Chris White. I'm the president of NEC Labs America, and I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Okay, Chris, what is NEC Labs America?
So NEC Labs America is the U.S. lab of the industrial labs that NEC Corporation has globally. So NEC has labs in Japan, obviously, Israel, India, Europe, Singapore. So we are the piece that's inside the U.S. We have a site in Princeton, New Jersey, as well as a site in San Jose. And what we do is sort of forward-looking disruptive research for the company. Right? The key to doing good research is always that you want to be inspired by good problems. So our parent, NEC, has a broad range of customers and very interesting challenges that those customers have. We work on trying to build new solutions to those problems, not just in an incremental manner of trying to, make our products 10 or 15% better, but in a manner of saying, can we actually create entirely new markets? Can we solve factors of 10? And that's the difference between sort of an industrial lab like NEC Labs America and sort of a conventional business unit research. From my perspective, it's the most fun place to be because it's always enormously inspiring problems coming from real customers, very, very smart, hardworking people drawn from across all different ranges of domains, from optical hardware, wireless hardware, machine learning, statistics, mathematics, and you take hard problems plus smart people and you get magic. So it's a great place to work and a fun place to sort of be.
Nice. And so this is like Xerox PARC or Bell Labs or any of these kind of basic research institutions, many of which have since shut down. Why has NEC maintained NEC Labs?
Yeah, so I will say that maybe it's Japanese planning that allowed it to stay. I've only been at NEC Labs for about 3 years. Prior to that, I was at Bell Labs for 22 years. So I spent my entire career in the industrial lab space. I think, unfortunately, what happened in the U.S. is that the push for short-term results hurt many of the industrial labs, because industrial labs, by very definition, are really here to do this sort of big disruptive research, right? Open new markets, create entirely new spaces. And that's not a 1 year thing, and it's not a 1 quarter thing. That's a 10-year thing. You get a really big advance. And I think in many cases, the industrial labs were sort of pulled closer to the business, asked to do things that were a little bit more incremental. And then once you're doing incremental research, you might as well be integrated with the business rather than as a separate sort of industrial lab. So I think what NEC has done, and I really do value their forethought here, is they have these global labs, which allows us to get a global perspective. They give us the ability to sort of be inspired by the real problems that our business and customers have, but build solutions that are not just improving our current product, but creating this new environment. And I think that they value that, and I think that's why we're around, because we're really delivering lots of interesting value into the company, and at the same time, straddling the sort of frontier of academic pursuits. So we publish as much as we transfer. And I think that that's where the industrial lab has always been great, of that balancing between real world productization of customer problems and advancing the state of the art. And my hope is that as we succeed, many other companies might actually have this sort of pendulum swing back, where they start understanding that just advancing the current product doesn't solve the big world problems that we have now, that we need to have this sort of balance between problem and solution that is a little bit decoupled from the business. And I think that decoupling is what industrial labs did really well. And I suspect we'll see sort of the pendulum swing back in the near future.
Hopefully.
I hope so anyway.
Hopefully. And this is the Digital Supply Chain Podcast, Chris. So what are you doing here? What, no. Tell me about work you're doing on supply chain. Where's our Venn diagram intersect?
Yeah. And first, I will apologize that I'm not a supply chain expert, right? So I haven't done 25 years in supply chain. What I've done is 25 years in modeling, simulation, communication, networking. And what I would argue is that the modern supply chain, right, where we're going, is less about the sort of coordination of things, right? We're doing a pretty good job of that coordination, but more about how we're going to take that coordination at scale and reduce the time scale over which we actually make decisions. So in my mind, the modern supply chain is really one about collaborative decision making. And the second that you go to collaborative decision making, it lands in the heart of the things that we're doing at the labs, right? We do a lot of stuff around machine learning. We do a lot of stuff around optimization. We do a lot of stuff around networking and a lot of stuff around simulation. So we're building what I would say is the sort of next generation platform that allows for supply chain optimization. And that means, as I mentioned, more intelligent decisions, more well-informed decisions, and faster decisions that allow us to sort of match this efficiency of everything else that we've been driving and transferring that into what we see in the supply chain. So it's, why we think it's important is a bit that it's fairly clear that on a global scale, the big problem that we need to solve is supply chain, and that the digitization efforts and the networking efforts that we've done in the past, we think are key to actually making that work. So at some level, we're here because it's an interesting problem, but at the other level, it's because I think we have solutions which can be applied globally that might actually help dramatically the overall efficiency of the global supply chain.
And how do you, what are some of those solutions? What is it that you can do to help solve supply chains?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're building, which I think is fairly interesting, is a project that actually combines three sort of fundamental engines. One of those engines is a negotiation engine, right? Which is essentially a way of taking many pairwise interactions and turning it into a marketplace of interaction between suppliers and the folks that need different components in different times. And what that allows us to do is to specify a mechanism by which even micro contracts can be done on a very, very efficient timescale. So what we've done is taken what used to be isolated interactions between pairs and turned it into a global interaction between multiple parties, and a timescale which might have been weeks or months before, and turns it into minutes or seconds. And that allows us to drive for efficiency in these systems that we couldn't get via the sort of conventional methodology. So that's one, the sort of negotiation engine. The second piece that we're looking at is what we call a policy engine. And where that becomes important is as you start evolving the supply chain and you start including government entities, which are trying to drive some overall behavior, they often put policies in place. And a policy might be, a tax rebate for an electric car, or a tax rebate for solar, or it might be a charge for using more than a certain amount of energy in a certain period of time. Those policies guide the overall, they sort of modify the metric of optimization for supply chain. But in many cases, unfortunately, the impact of the policy is not necessarily what they thought it was going to be. And the question is, how do you combine all those policies? Yeah, and you combine all those policies in a way that actually ensures that you're getting to the thing that you want. So we have negotiation, which is the sort of action. We have policy, which goes on top of monetary robustness and the other optimization metrics. And then the last one that we have is some very interesting agent-based simulation tools that allow us to actually predict the income or the outcome of a given policy combined with the negotiation that we're seeing in order to see what the future impact is going to be rather than just the local impact. And that idea of creating this sort of triangle of negotiation, policy, and simulation becomes a platform that we believe might actually allow us to, again, optimize in a local sense, right? Because almost any optimization problem, even inside of a company, can benefit from this sort of policy negotiation simulation. But more than that, we see it as a key component for this sort of global optimization, where you have multiple parties that want to interact to achieve a greater goal, right? Carbon neutrality, or reduce overall energy usage, or any of the sort of global metrics that companies want to go after. But instead of them trying to do it individually, working in the context of a platform like this to allow the global optimization to happen in a sort of autonomous fashion. The control is still there for the companies, but to the extent that they can say, this is what I need, this is what I can deliver, here are the time frames, the system tries to build the sort of optimal matching in this sort of global environment. So that's what we're building as a tool. And the long-term goal, right, would be that at some level we know there needs to be I'll sort of say an internet of supply chain, right?
Right.
A communication method between companies with standardized interfaces and standardized models that allow them to say exactly what I said. This is what I need. This is what I'm willing to pay. This is the time frame. And this is what I can produce. And this is what I charge. And this is the time frame. And that sort of global matching, not on a week, month, or year timescale, but on a second, millisecond, microsecond timescale, becomes the sort of platform that I think gets us to the next stage of supply chain. Right? It's clear we need to have a supply chain that is overall as efficient from a cost perspective as possible. But it's been made even more clear in the last 6 months, year, that we need to have one that is robust with respect to things like COVID, or with respect to global geopolitical changes. How we do that optimization that's not just lowest cost, just in time, but it's lowest cost, most robust, just in time, highest quality, makes that problem harder and makes automation more key to making that the reality that we have.
Sure. And how do you envisage something like that being rolled out? Are you thinking, I don't think you are, but correct me if I'm wrong, are you thinking that, NEC puts up its NEC supply chain platform and everyone gets an account on it? Or is it more a series of standards, or how does it roll out in practical terms?
Yeah. So I mean, NEC would love for everybody to sign on and have NEC be the global supply chain management system. But I think we have reality that comes in. I think it actually needs to look very much like the way the internet has been created. So I think there has to be a set of standards around how you communicate with this kind of platform. I think there has to be the opportunity for companies to put in their own kind of optimization, negotiation engine, policy engine, simulation, right? Clearly the negotiation that's necessary for pharmaceuticals is different than the negotiation for oil, is different than the negotiation for, very specific customized entities. So the idea here is that we're trying to build a platform, right? On the research side, we're opening new markets. We're trying to create a new environment to point at something and say, this is what we think it needs to look like. And then, of course, we start building pieces. I would imagine that the first user for the tool that we're building is going to be NEC, right? Internally, we have our own supply chain management. We have access to our own data. We can do the things that we're doing here and see if it helps our company, right? And to the extent that it starts helping us, then the partners that we have, we try to get them to sign on to the same thing, right? And we will certainly sell them the digital platform that does that. Or so long as they're using the right kinds of APIs and the right kind of standardized methods, we don't care what they're using for their optimization, right? They can build something similar. But it's clear that there needs to be some level of automation, right? And there already is. In many of these industries, there are already these kinds of markets. The question is, how do we actually bring it to this sort of larger scale where, the smallest company can sign on because they know how to make a standardized message and actually have negotiations done with the largest company that would be impossible now because they're not even going to answer their phone. But if there's an automated way for this to happen, all of a sudden we get to a much greater efficiency overall. So I think that's sort of the way the path goes. The thing that's interesting for us is I mentioned these sort of three pieces, right? Negotiation engine, policy engine, and simulation. NEC is actually pursuing each of those independently as products that we might sell into the marketplace as well. So the simulation piece can be used for supply chain. We've been using it for carbon neutrality, right? Energy utilization, but it can also be used for traffic optimization and a wide variety of other types of things. The negotiation engine is being used in the context of optimizing scheduling for shipping, for example, right? So you have multiple parties that might be shipping to the same person. How do they work together in order to say, well, let's put both of our products in the same box? That's a hard problem to negotiate if it's a pairwise interaction. But if people sign on to a platform that does that optimization, it's kind of an easy thing to solve. So I think this is not something that's going to happen tomorrow, right?
Sure.
Just like NEC is not going to own all of supply chain, we're not going to get everybody to sign on to this standardized way of doing things. But I think that the idea of building this kind of platform, building the interfaces into this that allow companies to optimize their both supply and demand sides of their equation, I think makes a lot of sense. And we're testing those ideas. And to the extent that it starts to work, I hope it grows into something that's much, much larger.
Okay. And would the likes of licensing some of that software or open sourcing it or creating standards around it, I'm just thinking, how do you push that out beyond NEC's borders apart from just having partners and suppliers use it?
Yeah. So I think there's a broader business model here at some level. And the nice piece about being labs, I don't have to worry as much about the business model if I'm opening a new market. From an NEC perspective, we certainly are going to have a core simulation engine, a core negotiation engine, and a core policy engine. And as I said, we're going to use that as products across a wide variety of different areas. So for us, that could be enough, right, at some level, because we can do that. That could be a great business. But we view this as a piece of a much larger construct, right? So all of this started because we were doing work in this sort of carbon neutrality space, right? Where NEC, and I mentioned that NEC did a great job of keeping industrial labs. One of the things that I've also learned is that NEC, more than other companies that I may have been interacted with in the past, actually believes what it says. So they want to actually drive for carbon neutrality. They want to try and provide the framework that allows the world to do that, right? We're not an oil company. We're not a solar company. We can't directly impact energy utilization or creation of carbon dioxide. But indirectly, the platforms that are used to optimize the way the world interacts, that is our core competence, right? So at some level, we started going down this path of what can we do in the carbon neutral space? And it was clear that there were many, many systems that were inefficient, right? And inefficient systems are systems that you typically create where the demand that you have fluctuates, but you fix your supply because you don't have the ability to have the two matched. And that's the sort of static way that leads to a large amount of waste. So you start asking the question, well, how do I actually drive the time scale down so I can match supply and demand better? And when you do that, you start seeing this idea of, well, you need to know who needs what and when, right? That's the negotiation piece. You need to know what you're driving for, right? So maybe there's certain times of the day where I don't care about how much energy I use because I have more than enough, right? The sun is working really well. So tell me the metric that I need to use. And then the simulation piece, and again, just to be very specific, this is not a digital twin kind of thing that people are pushing, right? I worry about digital twins where the amount of effort that you put into simulating something is more than the amount of effort that it would be to just measure something. So we're not trying to simulate all the details of the entire world's supply chain. It's about applying the right level of simulation just to understand how the pieces fit together. So when we saw those things come in place, it became natural that we would take the efforts that we were doing, the commercial pieces, and say, let's push this model a bit further. And that's where you start getting into this idea of let's standardize it. let's, license where we can if we want to make money on this piece, but let's interact openly with others, because this kind of a system, very much like, if we look at the internet, only works if people sign on, right? And people don't sign on to proprietary systems. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. So having an open standard that people can use to do this negotiation will benefit the world in a level that I think NEC views as a very positive outcome, even if we're not getting every penny of every transaction that happens inside of that construct.
Okay, interesting. In that energy example you mentioned there, you didn't talk about the possibility of demand-side management. Is that something you've considered?
So yes, but not so much in the context of this tool, right?
Okay.
So certainly, if you look at the way things go, the most efficient systems are the systems that on a very, very fine time scale match supply and demand. And you can do two things. One, you can actually adjust your supply to match the demand, or you can actually adjust your demand in order to match the supply. I often have one of these, the broader discussion around carbon neutrality. There's an old supply chain thing that I do know, which says that you don't want to store dead fish because dead fish will eventually not be fish. It's not a good product if it sits and goes away. But in certain things, like perhaps steel, an ingot of steel is actually something that's fine to store. And if you look at the amount of electricity that goes into creating an ingot of steel, you realize it's a tremendous way of saving electricity. So there is a broader idea in the negotiation side of this, which might say I have an industry that is very elastic with respect to its electricity, right? As much electricity as you give them, they can use it. As little as you give them, they can use it. So they have lots of flexibility. And then you have another industry where the amount of electricity that they can use is completely inelastic, right? They don't have the ability to turn it up or down. It is fixed. So one question you might ask is, how do I get the elastic company and the inelastic company to collaborate so that they actually drive for an overall good with respect to their energy? So, middle of the day, hottest day of the summer, the inelastic company is stuck. They have to use as much as they can. But the elastic company might be able to trade some of their elasticity, right? I'll make less steel right now, and I'll let you use my electricity so that globally our sum lands below the caps of industry. So you look at something like that, you go, okay, that makes sense. That's a great collaboration. But the second that you say, well, all the steel companies should be calling all of the malls and airports to try and negotiate that deal, all bets are off. Doesn't make any sense at all, because it's too small, it's too detailed in time for them to want to go out and pursue something like that.
Okay.
But if they had a platform that says, I have elastic energy usage between the hours of 8 and, 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. After 8 p.m., maybe I'm a little bit more fixed because some things are offline. And then another company that says, I need power between these different ranges. An intelligent system that knows the requirements and the capabilities and knows the policy positions in place can solve that, and can do that in a way that, again, doesn't require any manual intervention between the companies. So that's the supply chain that I think we get to, where you can start trading things between companies to achieve a greater whole that would be very difficult to even recognize that the trade makes sense if it were just individuals on a phone or lawyers sitting behind agreements and contracting things between companies.
And how do we get to where we are today to that being a reality?
I'm not sure I know. So I will tell you what we're doing, right? So from the lab side, we're working with some partners in this space who have these kinds of challenges. We are applying these tools with them to see if we can show that there is some significant value. So I think that's the first step of doing it. I think the next step is, as we mentioned, the standardization and propagation. Right? So we ask for, maybe a couple of companies to work together to see if this kind of negotiation works for them. As it starts to work, it grows. Having some conversations with governments, right? So that I think the government is a strong piece. I won't say we're really pushing it yet, but clearly most government policy doesn't work well. That's maybe my opinion, maybe that, but I think most of the government folks we've talked about say the same thing, right? Every time that they institute a big plan, they worry that it's going to drive the exact opposite result because there's so many interrelated things that they need to do it. So I think some kind of policy management engine is going to be critical for them. And I think once they start getting involved, then this sort of broader internet of supply chain that I manage, I think also might have internet of compliance or an internet of, I don't want to say regulation because that feels bad, but at some level, if there are tax credits being done because you as a company are achieving some goal or not using energy at a certain time or something like that, this is the ideal mechanism for which you can basically sign on and ensure that you're actually getting the results that you're supposed to get, right? That the reporting goes up through this system, that, the fact that you've traded your elasticity to some other company, and if the government is driving for that. So there's a way of managing overall compliance to those government pieces that I think is also important. So my thought would be that the way we'll see this happen is individual companies will start using things like this, right? The automated negotiation will go up, right? So we'll see that happening. But on the government side, I think governments are going to have to figure out how to manage policy from the local to the global to the, even broader kind of management system. And I think that will also grow, and those will coalesce into this sort of broader framework of standardization. That would be I'm a technology guy. I'm naive when it comes to business. I'm naive when it comes to social change. But from a technology perspective, the nice piece about this is that there's a driving force. There's a need. And the thing that I found is that you can never push technology into a situation. Technology always gets pulled into a situation because it satisfies a specific need. And I think we have a need here, and I think it's getting recognized on a global scale. So I think that as we build these technologies, they're going to get pulled in and hopefully integrated into something that is good.
Okay, great. We're coming towards the end of the podcast now, Chris. Is there any question that I haven't asked that you wish I had, or any aspect of this we haven't touched on that you think it's important for people to think about?
I think we've covered most of it. I think one place that might be an interesting one, but might be an entirely new podcast is what happens at an individual level, right? So are we as individuals, the consumers at the end of the supply chain, going to participate in this system as well, right? Where we can actually have requests in due time frame. I will say my rough answer is I think that's a bit further off, but I wouldn't have anticipated Amazon's success in the just-in-time delivery, next day kind of thing. So it may very well be that the third peg of what I mentioned, right? Industry, government, that this might be what consumers want, right? And it might be the way that consumers actually ask for things and manage their overall costs inside of some kind of system that is doing the negotiation for them, right? That is allowing them to say, I need this, and this. This is what I'm willing to pay. These are the constraints that I have. Go optimize my world. There's certainly inefficiencies in the consumer side that could be optimized that I think it would be very interesting to see how that might evolve.
Yeah, and I get your point there. The energy space is one that I've been working in for quite a while. And so when I mentioned that point about demand side management, that's kind of what I was thinking about. Both in the commercial world, but also in the residential world, it's possible to roll out demand side management. Whether you can get take up is another matter, but the likes of fridge freezers, the likes of electric immersion water heaters, these are storage mechanisms. We don't think of them that way, but they are. If you have an electric water heater, an immersion water heater, for example, when electricity is cheap, you can have that ramp up the temperature of the water to 50, 60, 70, 80 degrees C. And then when electricity is expensive, let the temperature drift back down to 60, 50 degrees, whatever it is. As long as you've got hot water when you turn on the tap, you don't care. As long as it's well insulated, well lagged, you don't care when it's actually heated, unless it happens to have been drained and is absolutely cold and you need it right there and then. But for the majority of the time, if you have a big tank and it's well lagged, you don't care when it's heated. And similarly, with cold products in your fridge, in your freezer, you don't care if the stuff in your freezer is at -10 or -20 or -5, as long as it's frozen. Same kind of idea. You can suck in energy to bring it down to -10, -20, whatever it is, and then let it drift back up to -10, -5, as long as it stays frozen. Again, same kind of idea. And there are other movable loads in your household as well. So if we had smart devices in our home, which listened to pricing signals or carbon signals on the grid and adjusted their behavior accordingly, which didn't impact on us. We open the fridge, we open the freezer, our stuff is cold, we turn on the hot water tap, the stuff is hot, but it's happened magically in the background. To your point, the negotiation takes place, it happens magically in the background, and our carbon footprint comes down and we're doing demand side management. We are sucking in that extra energy. EVs are a phenomenal example of this. You plug in your EV when you get home from work in the evening, next morning it's full. You don't care when that happens. You could do the same with dishwashers, clothes dryers, whatever. You fill the dishwasher at 6 o'clock in the evening after you've eaten. I live in Spain, we'd be doing it at 11 o'clock at night, but that's neither here nor there. But you get the point. Long as it's, as long as the dishes are clean and dry the following morning at 7 a.m. when you get up, you don't care when it happens. These are movable loads, eminently movable loads. So anyway, getting on, that's a whole other podcast, as you said.
But I think you mentioned something really important here, because I think the whole smart grid push that happened maybe 10 years ago in the US was really around all of these kinds of demand response kind of optimization. And I think what hurt it was the fact that it wasn't standardized and open. It was closed and walled gardens. So, if you bought the right refrigerator, right microwave, right, all those pieces, it would work, but it would only work inside of that context. And I think that what has to happen here is a more global interaction. And if we get to that more global interaction, then I think the smart grid use cases all come back in very, very quickly. And people are not going to do this if they think it's cool technology. They're going to do this if it actually becomes a problem or something for them. And I think that also hurt the smart grid as well. But I think, as people get more and more electric cars, right, and everybody tries to charge at 5 o'clock when they get home, we're going to have to solve that problem. And I think this kind of negotiation solves that problem, because it is a way of registering your intent, right? I work at night. I need the car to be charged by 6 p.m. or 8 p.m., or I work in the morning and it doesn't need to be there until, 9 a.m. So I think there's important pieces of that are going to come into this as well. And I think the open, standardized model that could actually transcend from company to government to individual, hopefully will help and have more success than maybe we had in the past.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I remember at the time but the whole smart grid push started around 2008, 2010, that kind of time frame. And I wrote several papers and gave several talks at the time about it. And I called it Electricity 2.0, modeling it on Web 2.0. And talked about it, being like the internet. The electricity grids should be like the internet. It should be pretty much IP based, where everything, to your point, was open standards and everything could talk to everything else. And it's the only way it'll work. And we need to expand the grids as well. I mean, it's not too bad here in Europe where many of the grids are interconnected, but where you've got island grids, you've got something like 500 grids in the US. It's ridiculous, and most of them are not talking to each other. Yeah. Anyway, whole nother podcast, as we said.
Yes.
Chris, if people would like to know more about yourself or any of the topics we discussed in the podcast today, where would you have me direct them?
So you can send them to our website, nec-labs.com. I'll send you the link so you can include it with them. Yeah, I'm very happy if someone wants to try and contact me. I love this area. As I mentioned at the very beginning, good research is only done with the scrutiny of good problems. And, it's very easy to get caught up in your research and think, if I solve this, that's going to be everything. Where someone who has more knowledge or different knowledge can come in and say, you're not really aiming in the right direction. If you move to the left just a little bit, you're really going to hit the real problem. So
Right.
yeah, very happy to have conversations with folks around these things. I think it's important. And I think that the more ideas and more context we bring into it, I think the better it'll be.
Phenomenal. Phenomenal. Chris, that's been awesome. Thanks a million for coming on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me. Always enjoy these kinds of conversations.